If evolution is real, and if there is this constant, I don't know, but it's visible. Like you can measure it in certain animals.
You can measure adaptation.
Yeah,
but there's no evidence that in fact, I think we've kind of given up on the idea of evolution.
Tucker Carlson visited the Joe Rogan Experience and sat down for a wide range of topics. Some of them pretty normal and mundane, a lot of public support. Some of them very esoteric, some of them quite controversial. Kind of sandwiched in the middle of all of this was a conversation that struck up about evolution. And Joe just kind of mentions evolution as something that, of course, everybody believes in, because evolution is just what we're taught and it's how we understand the world. And it's really become a part of just our general heuristics. It's a part of the social imagination in our current secular culture. It's just a given that Darwinian evolution is the scientific theory that explains all of human life. And Tucker Carlson isn't quite so quick to accept that. Let's take a look at their conversation.
Cares about you. You're important to the people around you.
If we don't think people are important, then what do we think is important? I guess that's what I'm saying.
Not necessarily that we don't think people are important, but if evolution is real, and if there is this constant, I don't know, but it's visible. Like you can measure it in certain animals.
You can measure adaptation.
Yeah,
but there's no evidence that in fact, I think we've kind of given up on the idea of evolution.
So, first of all, it's beautiful how shocked Joe is when Tucker just says, "Is it real? Like, is evolution real?" Joe, again, just lives in a culture with a social imagination who says, of course it is. I mean, it is a given. It's like gravity is what keeps us glued to the earth. It's why when you drop something, it falls. And evolution is how we came from a single-celled amoeba through a long chain of different evolutionary processes and ended up as human beings. Like everyone just knows that, right? We're taught that in school. It's how we think about things. It's even really how we do a lot of psychology now, is by looking back at our primordial ancestors. And so he's absolutely shocked. Now, what Tucker is going to say, they're not going to use these words, is he's making a differentiation between microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution is what he's calling adaptation. This is what Darwin saw in Darwin's finches, which is like over time, the beaks of the finches would be shaped differently on the different islands, I believe the Galapagos Islands, because of the survival advantages on one island of having a long, skinny beak in order to get in between the tree or branches or rocks or whatever. On another island, the finches would have much sturdier, bigger, bulkier beaks because they ate a lot of hard-shelled nuts and they needed to be able to crack them. And so just through selective mating and survival of the fittest, there is microevolution or adaptation. What Tucker is casting doubt on is whether or not there is such thing as macroevolution, which is evolution where one species actually becomes a different species. So let's listen to more of their conversation.
Theory of evolution as articulated by Darwin is like kind of not true.
Right? In what sense? Wow.
Well, in the most basic sense, the idea that, all life emerged from a single cell organism and over time, and there would be a fossil record of that, and there's not. And
there's not a fossil record of transitionary species, like species that are adapting to its environment.
There's tons of record of adaptation, and you see it in your own life. I mean, I have a lot of dogs. I see adaptation in dogs, through the litter to litter. But no, there's no evidence at all zero, that people evolve seamlessly from a single cell amoeba. No, there's not. There's no chain in the fossil record of that at all. And that's why you don't actually hear people. You hear them make reference to evolution because the theory of adaptation is clearly, obviously true. But Darwin's theories totally, that's why it's still a theory almost 200 years later. No, we have not found that at all. And I can't even guess. I mean, I have my own theories on it, but they're not proven.
What are your theories?
God created people.
So Tucker says, all right, you don't believe Darwin's theory. What's your theory? And Tucker says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Like that's the theory that he goes to. It feels like a dub if you are a Christian, but he doesn't just come out blindly. He first cast aspersion on the main theory, almost the only theory. Now there is third wave biology. And if you look into it, an increasing number of biologists have also pretty much thrown out Darwin's theory of evolution for a lot of reasons we'll talk about, including the fossil records, but other reasons we'll get to in a minute. And then he's like, well, what's your theory? And he just says what God says. I mean, that God made them. In the beginning, he made them. Male and female, he made them.
Distinctly, and animals. I mean, I think that's I think what every person on Earth thought until the mid-19th century, actually.
Right, but
it's not a new idea.
They didn't have computers. They didn't have a general understanding that we have today of the process.
Do you think we understand more now?
Yes.
Really?
You don't think that we understand more today?
We understand way less. We understand so little that we're actually sitting here allowing like a bunch of greedy, stupid, childless software engineers in Northern California to like flirt with the extinction of mankind.
So how they got into this conversation was a conversation around the valuing or devaluing of human life at the macro level, where people are talking about things like depopulation and how there's too many people on Earth and all the problems that that's going to cause, and how this is really this Satanist view of like too many people, people are bad, we're the problem, the Earth is pure, we're the cancer upon it. And then they break into this side conversation about evolution. Does Tucker have any real validity to what he is saying? Of course, the proposition that God created humanity and animals distinct in an act of creation ex nihilo, that is a faith position. I believe that there are good philosophical reasons to believe it, but you do have to believe that on faith. What Tucker's trying to point out is that to fully believe in Darwin's theory of evolution to the point that you would stake your life on it, that also requires a high level of faith. What about the fossil record? That's really the one thing that he brings up. The fossil record is not a new problem. In fact, it is a problem that Darwin himself had. Darwin said, why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? What he's saying, in other words, is exactly what Tucker Carlson was saying, that yes, there is adaptation, and you can see adaptation in the fossil record. You can see adaptation in animals right now in the wild. However, there aren't these, what we call the missing link, which is like, how did we go from fish to birds? How did that happen? We don't have any fossil record of what took place in between those two things. Here's something else Darwin said. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. Darwin knew all these time ago, over a century ago, he knew that the greatest claim against him at that point was the fossil record. Now, in the preceding century and a half, how has the fossil record developed? Well, it's developed immensely. I mean, we have just magnitude more fossils on hand. Have we found the missing links? No, we have not.
Wow.
So they're still missing. The missing links are missing. And evolutionary biologists are desperately trying to explain this away. And they'll even admit that what there seems to be, instead of this graduated step, there just seems to be like an explosion of new animals. Well, how does that solve their problem? They talk about the Cambrian explosion, which is like all of the animals kind of fully developed all at once and no evidence around them of any evolutionary progress. So there are some problems. There are other problems that people point out with macroevolution. And I've always put my cards on the table. I'm comfortable with macroevolution if there's ever good evidence for it. It's kind of a non-issue for me. I believe in God. I think there is good reason to believe in God. I've also experienced God. And if there is macroevolution, I'm comfortable with that being a tool that God used in order to progress his world forward, the same way he uses microevolution, adaptation in animals. However, there are some other problems that people don't have good answers for. There's the problem of irreducible complexity. This is the theory put forward by some in the intelligent design community, which no one has really given a good answer to. When you actually look at the papers that are going against irreducible complexity, they just kind of appeal to authority and say, well, the vast majority of scientists don't believe in this. But the vast majority of scientists are captured by Darwinian evolution. They just aren't. Irreducible complexity says that there are some systems inside of biological life that are simply too complex. If you removed any one part, they would no longer function. And so one of these is like eyesight. The difference between eyesight in fish and eyesight in land-dwelling mammals, they are so distinct and both systems are so complex that in the evolutionary process, what you would have ended up with is some missing link that's necessarily blind, and survival of the fittest doesn't necessarily help for blind land animals in most cases. And so there's all of these issues, and that's just one. There are other issues in the heart, all kinds of systems that are irreducibly complex. There's the fact of what Darwin did not know. At Darwin's point, they didn't understand the cell, they didn't understand the gene, they didn't have DNA mapped. And so it was a very early version of trying to explain how we got to humanity without God. There's also the fact that we don't really evolve, we devolve. This is a law of the universe, that everything moves towards entropy. I believe it's the second law of thermodynamics. Everything moves towards disorder and disunity. And unless you're going to make the case that there is an intelligent designer behind macroevolution, then the laws that govern our world say that things don't evolve, they devolve. And you even see this in adaptation. It's not like there is some kind of system inside of the animal that is guiding towards positive evolution. It's actually the devolution of certain aspects of the animal that do end up having positive attributes for their survival. The other big issue is just the origin of life. Even if the theory of evolution can explain how you get from a single-celled amoeba all the way to human beings, which Tucker rightly pointed out, it cannot. But even if it can, even if we find all the missing links and we find the fossil record and we explain away irreducible complexity, we still have the problem of the origin of life. Where did that first single-celled amoeba come from? Francis Crick, who's the co-founder of the structure of DNA, he says the origin of life appears to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have had to have been satisfied to get it going. And still, in the year 2024, there are people who are working tirelessly. It's called Origin of Life Study. And they are trying to recreate the environment where somehow electrical impulses would pass through a gaseous environment and create some kind of life. Or they think that maybe there was just RNA, and RNA is what started, and it was self-replicating. It eventually became DNA. There is the idea of just kind of this primordial pool, and somehow out of that there's ideas about how deep at the deepest parts of the ocean that somehow life came into existence out of nothing. The problem is, at one point there was no universe, and now there is a universe, and so that came out of nothing. And it appears that even the first life came out of nothing, given if macroevolution is even true, which there is serious doubts on that. And so what is Tucker's theory? Tucker's theory is Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image and according to our likeness." The point he makes, without making it, is the idea of intelligent design versus Darwin's evolution is not faith versus science. It is, in fact, faith versus faith. And nobody tells you that. They don't tell you that there are irreducibly complex systems inside of animals that would not allow them to adapt without dying in the process. They do not tell you that there is a missing fossil record, no evidence of missing links. They don't tell you that when they find things that they try to position as these missing links, that they just have like tiny fragments of part of a skull, and then will map it onto their idea of what a missing link would be, because they have confirmation bias at play. They don't tell you that it's the greatest category error and the veil pulled over the eyes of generations to say that microevolution, adaptation, somehow equals macroevolution, jumping from species to species. They don't tell you that. You're just supposed to take it, and you take it by faith. And I would say there's an even more reasoned faith position with a much longer tradition and much deeper understanding of what it means to be human. And that is found at the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed so you can stay up to date with all new content. And if you want early access, exclusive content, and monthly live Q&As, make sure to check out patreon.com/ClaytonTime.